all those colleagues who've done a lot of serious work on these amendments. There are a great number of them, of course, and I've already said what I think about that. There's a lot of duplication. One positive point, though, is that many people have shown serious interest in us achieving an acceptable and implementable fisheries policy. There's still a lot of work to be done, but I think if we work seriously together, and we are doing so, looking at the serious amendments which have been tabled, I think we have every hope of success, and I'd like to thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Radust, and thanks for all the work you have done on this. Having read hundreds of these amendments during the holiday period, I sympathise with what you've just said. I hope the shadow rapporteurs in the 4 meetings that you have scheduled can compact all of these amendments into some workable compromises. Otherwise, when we come to vote, we'll be here until Christmas voting on them. Can I take all the shadow rapporteurs in order, first with Mrs. Fraga?
Thank you very much, Chair. And thank you to the rapporteur too. Over the summer, I've also been studying this, probably not as closely as Ms. Rodust. And it is true that it's complicated to analyze all these amendments right now because there are all sorts of amendments representing all sorts of views. So, but those of us who have tabled amendments will have to debate them in our own political groups because there are, of course, different opinions. And I think it's important that we set out a clear procedure that will help us work together and get the best possible result, or at least to do the least damage to the CFP. Now, so far, I haven't received any compromise amendments from Ms. Rodust. She did mention that she sent them, but at least up until now, I haven't received any compromise amendments. So right now, I can't say anything about any compromises she may have tabled. That's the first thing. Now, the second thing, I think it's in order to work on the amendments, we simply must have all the amendments. Because for one, I'm unwilling to only work on part of the amendments. I want to have all of them. Because, of course, you could change one thing in exchange for something else. So I would like to ask Ms. Rodust that she circulate the whole block of amendments to the entire report. Because I really don't want to be approving amendments by section. I want to look at the whole report. And I think that's something to bear in mind on behalf of my group when it comes to procedure. But as for the meetings, we already have a timetable. And of course, the fishing sector is awaiting a response. But what we want is a good reform. We don't want a poor result just because we're trying to rush things through. If we can have all these meetings this quickly, then great. If we can reach an opinion this quickly, excellent. And I've even told Ms. Rodust that I'm willing to work with her and the other colleagues even outside the scheduled timetable. I'm willing to dedicate my own timetable to this issue at this point. But we must first have all of the amendments. We must have the compromises. And, well, if we won't be ready to vote on the 9th of October, then on the 19th, it doesn't really matter. It's all the same, isn't it? I already have in mind some compromises, and they're not my own personal opinion, of course. They're a group opinion. But right now, I can't discuss this because I don't have the information necessary to carry out such an analysis. And my own personal opinion is, of course, already reflected in the amendments I've tabled. And this is something I've already exchanged with Mrs. Rodust on. But what I would like to mention is the issue of regionalisation, and we must be clear on that when we look at the compromise amendments, because that is something we simply must solve in the best way possible. Thank you very much, Chair, and that's all from me now.
Thanks, Mrs. Fraga. Mrs. Lavan.
Thank you very much, Chair, and I'd like to thank the Rapporteur, Mrs. Rodes, for all the work I understand that she's done during the summer holidays. I have also spent some hours and days looking through all the amendments, and I'm really looking forward to seeing the compromises, since I completely agree with what Mrs. Rodes said, that there are so many amendments going in the same direction, and I think it's very wise to try and structure all of these amendments before we start discussing. And since there are so extremely many amendments, and we've already been through many of the fundamental points in discussions in committee before, I don't see it fit that we start a discussion on the topics or on the subjects here and now before we've seen the compromises. I think that's a bit difficult, because it's so many things that you would like to cover. So I'd just like to emphasize that the Green Group, we're really committed and want to work hard with all of you, all the shadows and the rapporteur. And of course, I think Mrs. Fraga has a point that it's very good to see all the compromises before we can see the whole picture. But we're willing to follow any method that the rapporteur will suggest. We haven't seen that really in detail yet. So I think that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hudson.
Thanks, Mr. Vice President, and thanks to the rapporteur for outlining the timetable, which I think is ambitious given the sheer volume of material that we have in front of us. I seem to recall 10 years ago when we last did this that we spent many days sitting in compromise meetings thrashing through what we thought at that time was a large number of amendments, but it was nothing like the number we have in front of us now. So I look forward to taking part in these compromise shadow meetings to try to seek progress, because although we have a necessity to get the job done in terms of time, I think we have an absolute responsibility, as others have said, to get it right this time. And if I may rehearse the kind of opening shots of this entire reform debate some years ago, even the Commission itself in its Green Paper acknowledged that the current CFP has been a failure. So I think that we need to try to achieve something that will actually work this time, even if it means that we take a slightly different route in terms of the precise timetable. And I'm not suggesting that we look for reasons to delay, but I think it is important that we have this opportunity and that we use it and that we try and get it right. If we were designing a fisheries management policy, I don't think we'd be starting from where we are now. We'd be starting from a clean sheet. And that's why I think that among the most important amendments and themes in this reform has to be about decentralisation or regionalisation, whatever we wish to call it. Everyone accepts to varying degrees the necessity, the benefit and the potential for improvement through devolving or decentralising decision making. But if you look through the amendments that have been tabled, there are degrees of enthusiasm, shall we say, in terms of how far to go and how fast. Now, my amendments, my own 100 amendments, a mere fraction of the total, focus heavily on decentralisation, because I simply believe that decentralising real power to Europe's fishing nations, giving them, those who have most incentive to gain from success in conservation, the incentive and the authority to make it work, in principle, is the best way forward. And that's why I am resistant to so many of the Commission's original proposals, which would set down centrally too much of the framework rather than devolving or decentralising. That's when my amendments, for example, even changing little words. Member States shall and may are very important in terms of how this process can go forward. I think that we should be decentralising and that we should be encouraging Member States to work together in logical sea basins where those with fishing opportunities in those areas can devise systems which will work, will succeed, will conserve fish stocks and will maintain thriving fishing communities, which is what we all claim to want to do. So I look forward to pitching in to the meetings that are to be had, and I hope that we can deliver a successful result without undue delay. But again, I put forward the plea that this time, for goodness sake, let's devise something that will actually succeed, not just seek headlines and find in a couple of years' time, or worse, in 10 years' time, we're back here again, wringing our hands and wondering why, yet again, that a common fisheries policy for Europe hasn't been a success.
Thank you very much. The last of the shadow rapporteurs here this morning is Mr. Ferreira.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, at this point, I don't have a lot to say. We have to wait, I think, for the draft compromise amendments which the rapporteur is working on. I'll just say one thing, though. We have the experience whereby very frequently in important areas of the CFP, the Commission proposals have enormous influence over the final result, over the final policy. It's very difficult to carry out profound amendments, profound changes to the Commission's initial legislative proposals. Now, the Commission proposals, or legislative proposals, we think, are a long way off from answering the problems the sectors face in fisheries. I mean, enormous changes should be made to these proposals, I feel. We've had this centralised fisheries policy for the last 30 years, which has got us where we are. That's something which should be changed. And we also need the capacity, the ability, I believe, to make greater changes to the Commission's proposal. However, our powers to do that are very limited, and we're going to have this debate now in the Parliament within the limits which exist. We'll be very enthusiastic, very hard-working, but given what I've just said, I'll be working, and I'm sure other people will be, working in a spirit of scepticism with respect to the results we can achieve in terms of changing the Commission's initial proposals. We've also got our timetable, which is a quick one. It's urgent now to get through this work. But nevertheless, we have to avoid skipping over important points in the debate. There are certain things really we have to try and thrash out over the next 6 weeks or so. And I agree with Mrs. Fraga. We're going to have to look at these 2,500 amendments thoroughly. That's going to take time, and we have to do it properly, this work. This is a democracy, and we owe that to democracy. It's a shame we couldn't have got to this stage a little earlier, because we're now under pressure of time. But as I repeat, my concern is that we don't seem to have the power and the capacity to make profound changes to Commission proposals. I'd love to in this particular case, but unfortunately I don't think that's going to be possible. If we can make certain small changes, for example, transferable fishing concessions, that I'd like changes in that area. I'd be pleased if we could make changes in that area at least, but there's a lot more that should be changed with respect to these Commission proposals. I agree also with many of the points made by Mr. Hodgson. The main thing we should have been doing, I believe, though, in this reform of the CFP is aim for decentralisation from top to bottom, really decentralisation, decentralisation, decentralisation. And that's not the path upon which we have embarked with these Commission proposals, unfortunately. So we have these Commission proposals, and even with these 2,500 amendments, I don't think they're giving as much margin for manoeuvre anyway in terms of moving away from the Commission's proposals and making the profound changes which I believe should be made to those proposals. I'm being pessimistic, I'm being sceptical, but that's the situation. Nevertheless, I'm willing to work hard with everybody else as we go through this process.
Mr. Davies.
Thank you, Chairman. I thought this might be quite a long debate, but I suppose looking at the pile of papers on our desk, we're all somewhat intimidated and overawed and don't know where to start. So we look to the rapporteur for leadership. And her task is to put together some compromises. But we also must recognise that if we're to actually achieve a significant reform of the common fisheries policy, those compromises have got to be based upon meeting the hopes and aspirations that have been expressed many times in this committee, that we develop a common fisheries policy that is genuinely sustainable, that allows fish stocks to recover, that ensures there can be a good, successful future in the long term for the fishing industry. And that means not seeking the lowest common denominator, a simple compromise. It means a compromise which I hope is sufficient to win majority support in the committee, but which meets the objectives that many of us hold for the reform process. I'll just address one issue of all those in this pile of amendments. And it also almost comes down to one sentence, and it goes to the very heart, of course, of the whole CFP reform. It's about the meeting of maximum sustainable yield targets. And almost within one sentence, there are three key issues. Okay, we all say we want to achieve maximum sustainable yield. But the first issue is, by when? So, do we keep the words 2015? There's a debate about that. The second issue is, do we actually want not simply to ensure that we're not diminishing stocks, keeping them stable at maximum sustainable yield, or do we actually want to keep the word above in that sentence and therefore allow just fish slightly under MSY and therefore allow fish stocks to recover? Which in the long term we all want, but increases the short-term difficulties of reaching the objective. And the third is the words which the Council have inserted, and there's lots of amendments calling for them to be inserted here, is, yeah, we want to achieve maximum sustainable yield by 2015 where possible. Now, what does where possible mean? If ever there were two words which allow politicians wriggle room for escaping firm, legally binding commitments, it is those two words. We're talking here about MSY, which means fishing mortality, not biomass, fishing mortality. So to achieve MSY by any dates requires a political decision, because our ministers go and set the tax and the quotas each year. They can achieve MSY instantly, simply by cutting the fishing effort. There's balances here. We don't want to. We want to keep people in work for as much as possible, while allowing the fish stocks to recover. But it's a political decision. But you allow those words where possible to remain. If we put them in, and if we don't force the Council to change its position, then the First Minister will go along to at December and will find a way of getting where possible interpreted which suits their particular national desires, national circumstances. And then the next minister will come along and say, well, a precedent has been created, and they'll try to stretch it a bit further. And before long, the whole idea of having a genuinely sustainable common fisheries policy will disintegrate in these hagglings. So, getting those words making sure that we insert legally binding requirements upon ministers, upon us all, to achieve maximum sustainable yield and the rebuilding of fish stocks is absolutely important. And if I can just finish with just making one suggestion. Okay, of course, compromises have to be made within the Parliament, and we must always remember that whatever we do in the Parliament, we then go into negotiations with the Council. So if the Parliament wants to achieve anything in those negotiations and use its influence, it has to go in there with a strong negotiating position, because it is going to have to sacrifice something. You know, we're always going to end up with something less than we sought. But on the issue of where possible, can I propose that we ask the Council to reverse the burden of proof? What about achieving maximum sustainable yield by 2015, except where impossible? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Sanchez Presedo.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you. I would just like to thank the rapporteur for the efforts she's making. I think that the 2,600 amendments is going to be very difficult to compress into compromises. So she's got a lot of work ahead of her. It's a very difficult job. Her work will be in stages, so perhaps the initial comments we make will be able to help with the next stages, the next meeting. Perhaps if we work by packages, that might help you to clarify the situation and to take account of different sensitivities. But you do have a lot of work ahead of you. I'd just like to make some comments about the general thrust of this. We're trying to reform the CFP. It has to be a common policy. I'm in favour of decentralisation. That doesn't, however, mean that we want to see it renationalised. The fisheries policy has to be common, has to be European. Responsibilities have to be split properly. We shouldn't forget how important the sector is economically, socially, in terms of employment. We need to bear all of this in mind and keep this clear. We have to make it sustainable and do so as quickly as possible. However, we have to have a roadmap and have the means available to us to actually enact it. We can't just put down goodwill on paper, which will then lead to conflict and problems. We have to establish methods as far as we can. And also set dates. We have to have the correct means available, otherwise we're just going to create problems for the sectors and people in place. We have to take account of national sensitivities. We also have to have correct research and have dates to ensure that our decisions are taken in a responsible manner. We don't just want what we do to say on paper. It has to actually be translated into actual fact. One important point is that common fisheries policies have to take account of the rules of the internal market. The fishery policy can't be inconsistent with everything we have in the internal market. Discards is obviously also an important topic as well. And I want to see real progress on this. Discards have to... We have to see what we can do with these discards. We can't have illegal products on the market. But we have to find some kind of reasonable solution and sustainable solution to this issue. Another important topic, I think, is small-scale fishing and aquaculture. It has an important social side to it. They're part of our fabric in the European Union throughout the coast. There's a lot of local activity. They're connected to local policy, environmental policy. It's important for marine resources. It's important throughout European fishing. And I think we should have a specific chapter on the in the CFP on this type of small-scale activity. Thank you. Mr. Stevenson.
Thanks very much, Chairman. Just 2 points I want to make. First of all, on what Chris Davis said. When the Council, in their June meeting, decided that they should seek to achieve MSY where possible by 2020, I assumed that that was biomass MSY by 2020. I now discover, in fact, they mean fishing mortality MSY by 2020, which is quite a distance away from what we were talking about. We were talking about FMSY by 2015 and BMSY by 2020, where possible or not. That was the point of contention, but that's certainly not what the Commission are aiming for. That is something we'll have to clarify during the debate on the amendments. We have to be careful about unintended consequences here, though, when you're talking about the where possible or where impossible, as you said. If, for instance, you achieve BMSY by 2020 in a mixed fishery across all the species, say in the North Sea, except cod, and cod then becomes the choke species, the consequences for that is, you may then, having not achieved MSY and cod, you may have to close the fishery for all the other species until you achieve MSY. So let's be always remembering the unintended consequences when we take these decisions. The other point on timetabling, and I mentioned this when we were talking about the blockage that we're facing on the multi-annual plans. We were discussing this in the coordinators this morning. The blockage from the Council. We were looking at how this could impact on timetabling. And following what Mr. Hudson was saying, we have to, I think, be very careful on what we do with timetabling, because if we stray into second reading and we don't have a decision by the end of next year, the minute we go over into 2014, we have no legal basis for a reformed CFP. And as happened, as we all remember, with novel foods, the whole thing would then collapse and 3 years' work would go down the drain, and we would be at the mercy then of the Commission to come back with a new draft legislative proposal, which may take another few years, and then it would take 3 more years of deliberation in Parliament. We cannot let the sector down on this. And there are strong rumours, I said this earlier this morning, there are strong rumours that because of the thrust from all of us on regionalisation, as Mr. Hudson correctly pointed out, that there are certain members of the College of Commissioners who would quite like to derail the timetable for that very reason, to stop regionalisation being implemented, because they are saying if you allow meaningful regionalisation in the CFP, the next thing Parliament will be demanding it under the CAP. And they don't want that. They're frightened of that. So beware that we do not play into the hands of those people who want to derail our timetable. I think we have to work very hard to ensure that we achieve second reading next year. Thank you.
Gracias, señor.
Ms. Sloven.
Thank you, and excuse me for taking the floor again, but since there's so much discussion about MSY and above MSY in 2015 and where possible, I cannot refrain from doing a few comments on that. First of all, I'd like to point out, so that everyone keeps that in mind, that achieving MSY and keeping stocks at a safe level is a legal obligation in UNCLOS, which the European Union has ratified, and it's been a legal obligation for the European Union since 1994, I think. And then the world's nations recommitted to this in the Conference on Sustainable Development in Johannesburg 2002. Then the words "where possible" were introduced. But let me remind everyone, there was a new Conference on Sustainable Development this summer in Rio de Janeiro, and a new commitment from all the world's nations to achieve MSY with the words urgently. Urgently. It's a new word that's come into the text. You can check it. And, I mean, when the world's countries in 2002 in Johannesburg agreed on the words "where possible," they didn't expect that the European Union 2012 would say, well, no, it's not possible for us, the richest countries in the world, to achieve MSY. They were more thinking about the developing world, where you have lack of resources on research, on control, on all of that we have plenty of in this part of the world. So I think it's really shameful if the European Union at this time of age could not live up to these obligations that we actually have had as legal obligations since 1994, committed to at a number of international conferences, and latest a few months ago in Rio, where the word urgently was also introduced. So where possible, it can mean a lot of things, and I think for the developing nations it meant something completely different than it would for UK or Swedish or Spanish governments saying, well, it's not possible because we don't want to do it. I mean, we have to do it, and we have to show the rest of the world that we can do it. Thank you.
Señora Levin, damos la palabra ahora a la Comisión.
The Commission has the floor, please.
Gracias, señor.
Thank you, Chair. I'd first of all just like to congratulate the committee on their excellent contributions, on their proposed amendments, obviously in terms of number and how creative some of them are. The Commission has looked into all of the amendments and will analyse the compromise proposals when they come. And our attitude towards all of these is very positive. We have one main objective with this reform, but we're very flexible about how we can actually achieve these objectives. So the message we would like to give you is one of full cooperation, a positive attitude towards the amendments. And if I may, Chair, I would just like to recall some of the fundamental objectives that the Commission is trying to achieve with these amendments, and that we'd like to see in the future compromises. On maximum sustainable yield, all I would like to say here is that recent practice has shown that some resources which up to about 4 or 5 years ago were overused, according to recent studies, you can have economic advantages in terms of economic income when maximum sustainable yield is achieved, and they will provide a tangible example of the benefits of maximum sustainable yield. Do we want to give up these economic benefits? The starting point for the Commission is that we want to make the benefits of fishing as good as possible. On discards, you know that the Commission is going to look into this important topic. I would just say that a lot of the proposed amendments are moving in the right directions, and we're very happy that there's a clear awareness in this committee about how important this topic is. Our position is quite clear. This is absolutely essential. It's an absolute priority for the Commission that at the end of the day we should have a clear timescale for eliminating discards from European fishing. We shall have a fixed and legally binding deadline. Everything else, the methods, how we're going to do this, the Commission, as we've said and we'll say again, is very flexible, and we're very happy to listen to any ideas that may come out of the debate. On the multi-annual plans, yes, they are the basic tool for planning in our fisheries policy. The position, as you will have heard, is that we have to have interinstitutional agreement with the Council on how responsibility should be shared over the long term. Here, we just have to reiterate how important the Commission deems these plans to be. And I can assure you that you'll have the Commission's assistance in anything you need in this. Any kind of technical assistance that you need on this, the Commission is very open to working with you to ensure that we reach a satisfactory result. On regionalisation, I would also like to say a couple of words and try to respond to what Mr. Stevenson said. In the Commission, we have stated several times now that what we want is to go as far with regionalisation as the treaty allows us. The Lisbon Treaty is our only restriction in this area. And the Council in May has shown that progress will be made with regionalisation. If you just look at the general guidelines from the Council, you can see this. So the Commission won't cause you any difficulties in this area. The Commission is very positive towards this, and we're very happy to look into any proposals that come out. The only condition is that it has to be compatible with the Lisbon Treaty. In aquaculture, where we welcome the amendments that have been proposed, but there's just one thing to remember here. Don't lose sight of the fact that this is an area of competency which is shared with member states, and all of the strategic studies that we've carried out have shown that if we want to be successful in aquaculture policy, then member states have to also have strategic plans, for example, for granting licenses for aquaculture. So we just shouldn't forget the fact that for agriculture, the European Union can do everything it wants, but it won't be successful unless national states have a strategic plan. Because a lot of the problems are at national level, and it's the nations who have responsibility for aquaculture. So that was a very brief overview of some of the principles that we have in our position, and as I said, we're very positive to all of the amendments. Thank you. Mrs. Rodas, just to close the debate.
Ja, vielen Dank. Ich denke...
Well, thank you. I think it's very clear from the debate that all colleagues are working seriously on this report, and they all want to achieve a good, solid result. I'd like to go back to individual comments. Mrs. Fraga, first of all. Mrs. Fraga, many of your amendments, I've looked at them very favourably, and I don't think we're going to have major problems with your amendments. But to expect that all the amendments should have been ready by the 20th of July in all the languages, so that we could have got all the compromises ready by today, I think that would have been asking a bit too much. We're going to have to work little by little now, piece by piece, on what we've got ahead of us. I've already said that for many of the amendments there's no major disagreement in the committee. And also a great number of amendments are very similar, only differ the ones from the others by a single word in many cases. But now those amendments we can work through very quickly. Now, where there are difficulties in us reaching agreement, we're going to have to work on those. And let me assure you, I am not going to try and push things through that you don't want and that members of the committee don't want. I want us all to be satisfied with the final result and for us all to agree that we've got a sensible final result. The thing is, I'm not going to ask my staff to work any harder than they already are working. They're working every evening at the moment with me until late at night, and there's a limit to what I can ask of them. I don't mind giving up portions of my holiday for this work, as I have done, but I'm not going to ask my staff to do that as well. I've got an excellent team, my private staff, the people in the Secretariat, the people in my group, and they're all working from morning till late at night on working out compromise amendments. We can't work harder. So please forgive me if not all compromises are ready for the 12th of September. I'd still ask you, though, to support me in the work remaining to be done, and I say let's just have a look at what we've got on the 12th of September, but not everything will be ready. Now, I don't want to go into individual policy areas, decentralisation, MSY, discards, etc. We're all going to be looking at these things together as we go along, and for all these issues that we have a great number of proposals, and I'm optimistic therefore that we will find solutions. Personally, and I think this applies to other members, I think what was counterproductive was the Council meeting in July. We've had a number of amendments tabled which are identical to the Council's conclusions in July, strangely enough. And I think it's time the Council understood that we are an intelligent bunch of people and are capable of developing our own ideas rather than just swallowing the Council's conclusions. So there, I think the Council could have held back a little and waited for our work to be more advanced. Now, Mr. Ferreira, he seems to have the impression that everything, he's not in the room anymore, that's a shame. He seemed to have the impression that everything was already fixed and that we didn't have much influence over the Commission's proposals because the Commission, what the Commission had proposed was going to stay without much change. No, I don't agree with that. We've been working on these proposals, all the Commission proposals, over the last 2.5 years, getting ready for them. And I do believe that if we have to, we as an independent Parliament can have our influence over the Commission and the Council. We do have powers, we do have co-decision, and I think we can be successful on that basis. On Chris Davis's points, Chris Davis said very clearly, Elizabeth Bella Levine also said the same thing. The Council, as you said, is announcing to the outside world that its conclusions are the final conclusions. Well, I agree with you, that's not true. They've been saying this, they said it at the German Fisheries Conference. Well, that's not true, because they've got this pile of documents coming their way, have they not, from Parliament. So we have to point out to Council time and again that we in Parliament can do sensible work and have our influence over them. They have to understand that and accept that. I agree with what Struan said. He was extremely clear. It is our duty to stick to the timetable. And to say that we can't get things in place by mid-2014, 2015 isn't true. Our timetable is very ambitious. The original timetable, my original timetable, would have brought this work to a close at the beginning of the summer holidays. I would have liked to have had all the amendments ready and translated at the end of July. I was asked to extend that period. I've done that. And I'll extend the deadline again if that's necessary. it might not be possible to keep to the latest timetable I proposed. But there I'd appeal to all of you. Listen, we have obligations vis-à-vis the fisheries sector. We have obligations vis-à-vis the outside world. And therefore we're going to have to roll up our sleeves and perhaps put in a little overtime to get through this work. And really we have to try and get this to plenary, if possible, by the end of this year at the latest. That's my objective, and I'm convinced that you'll help me achieve that objective. So first of all, I think what we have to do is agree on what can be agreed upon, where we're all in consensus, and then we have to deal with the difficult points, get them all on the table and thrash our way through them together and work out further compromises. So I'm looking forward to this work and meeting you again to discuss these issues. Thank you, says the Chairman. That concludes item 7. Can we now go on to the next item? Where is it? Amendment of Council Regulations 2371 on the conservation and sustainable exploitation of fisheries resources under the Common Fisheries Policy. Now, Mr. Hodgson has been hard at work. I'd like to thank him for the work he's done and now hand over to him for an introduction. Mr. Hodgson.
Thank you, President, for your kind introduction. It's no great surprise that the Commission has finally formally acknowledged through this, the presentation of this proposal, that the original CFP reform timetable is slipping a little bit, to say the least. And this proposal by the Commission seeks to extend the current regime within the 12-mile nautical limit for a further 2 years. I've been highly critical, as anyone in this committee should know, of the Common Fisheries Policy. There are not many parts of it that I would say complimentary things about. And there haven't been all that many occasions in this committee either over the many years that I've been a member of it where I've said I agree with the European Commission. So that was a shocking statement coming from me. But I do agree with the European Commission when it says in its Green Paper, it said in its Green Paper on CFP reform, that the 12-mile regime, the coastal regime, quote, has generally worked well and could even be stepped up. And further, in a 2002 report on reporting obligations, it said, quote, the regime is very stable and the rules have continued to operate satisfactorily. So if we accept that, and that's not to say there is no room for improvement anywhere, but the principle is acknowledged, and I would agree that when you allow Member States the maximum input to management and responsibility, lo and behold, the regime has generally worked well and could even be stepped up. Yes, I agree. I was severely tempted to propose as part of this that the regime be made permanent, because I have voted for amendments in the past under the previous CFP reform that would have had that effect. And I was also tempted to propose amendments which would have extended the 12 miles much further out from our coasts, because I have voted in the past for amendments which would have done that 10 years ago under the previous CFP reform. But slightly reluctantly I acknowledge that this particular report is perhaps not the place to formally propose that, but that should be part of the CFP reform debate. And I hope that I will have some support in these principles as part of the broader debate on reform. So this report, apart from the opinionated statements that I've made, actually accepts that we should adopt this particular proposal and allow the 12-mile regime to be extended for these 2 years, and look forward to further debate on the principles that I hold dear as part of the broader reform debate that we are about to have in these compromise meetings.
Muchas gracias. Tengo solo una petición.
Thank you. Just one speaker on my list. Anybody else? Mr. Fraga. And then Mr. Ferreira. Yes, thank you. I'd like to thank Mr. Hodgson for his work. But unfortunately, I do have to disagree once again with his conclusions. I agree that points with his first point that we accept the Commission's proposal, and for the opinion of the Council should go to Council, obviously. But I don't agree with points 2 and 3. First of all, because I think they go further than is required under the remit for this report. So I think that the basic regulation should be dealt with in Mrs. Rodust's report and not in this report. And we shouldn't forget either that we have the principle of freedom of access, which is one of the main principles of the European Union. And there's this general acceptance that we keep the 12-mile limit and not extend it, as Mr. Hodgson is suggesting. Otherwise, I find what Mr. Hodgson is suggesting is acceptable, but that any waivers or exceptions which are allowed should not be allowed to become permanent, especially when it comes to free access. So I'll be voting against points 2 and 3, and of course I agree that otherwise we can have this 2 years extension as proposed by the Commission if the basic regulation doesn't come into force this year. Thank you very much, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Ferreira. Thank you, Chairman. Well, I'd like to thank Mr. Hodgson for the work he's done. And unlike Mrs. Fraga, I fully agree with this proposal. And I think the terms in which it's couched, calling on the Commission to make proposals, and Mr. Hodgson also made the point that we have to consider this issue within the framework of the reform. And that ultimately the provisions contained in these proposals should be confirmed. And I agree with what Mr. Hodgson says about the exclusive zone, as opposed to what Mrs. Fraga said. And I am sure that these proposals will be acceptable. As Mr. Hodgson said, so much is going wrong with the CFP, but there is one positive point. And when we have something positive, we should welcome it, and in terms of the principle involved, we should keep it and, if necessary, extend it. So I believe this principle should be confirmed, and it should be possible to go beyond the 12 miles up to the end of the continental shelf, where appropriate. And we have to bear in mind that certain fisheries have their own characteristics. For example, the island regions, and one could extend the limits from between 100 and 200 miles, because there you do have sensitive biological areas where it's important to preserve resources. And there, local fleets could benefit from the extension of the exclusive zone. So these are things we have to discuss. These are reasonable proposals, but there are other areas, of course, where you have to allow freedom of access. But I think you can certainly define certain areas where it's justified to have exclusive zones. So what the good points of the PCP should be kept. But where necessary, we have to do what is necessary to protect resources. So I fully agree with the comments made by Mr. Hodgson. And as I say, if you have positive elements in the PCPs, they should be preserved. And also, if you do have decentralisation of the common fisheries policy, that's no bad thing under the right circumstances. So I look forward to progress on this report and progress on the Rodust report. And I hope that we can all agree to the extension of the exclusive fishery zones where this is appropriate. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Davis.
Briefly, Chairman, Struan Stevenson referred before to the fact that the coordinators initiated some discussion about what instruments we might use to try and put pressure on the Council to negotiate seriously on the issue of long-term management plans. And the possibility being floated of trying to identify some reports that could be held up to the annoyance of the Council with the agreement of all political groups. And the only question to me is whether this is one of them. We of course have to extend the current limits, but whether we need to do it by the time that's envisaged, I'm not so sure. If we could ensure that this was on the Council's agenda every 3 months until they finally said, until some minister finally asked the Council Secretariat, why aren't we talking to the Parliament? Why are we being put through this pain? Then maybe that would be no bad thing. So my caveat here is simply that yes, we need to extend the current legislation, but maybe we should be doing it for 3 months or 6 months rather than 2 years or more. And I recognise that that creates uncertainty and some difficulties for people we represent, but it also creates difficulties for the Council, and it therefore becomes a serious tool. Anyway, I think this is a subject for another consideration, but that's my caveat on the remarks I've heard so far. Thank you.
Señor Davis, le doy la palabra a la Comisión, señor.
Commission, please.
Thank you very much. Good morning. Very quickly, very briefly, of course, you can imagine that we would like to congratulate the rapporteur with the report. It's always good to see a report that supports the Commission proposal, and I would say that, at least in the conclusion, the report supports the proposal. We also take very good note of the elements of criticism that we already knew from Mr. Hodgson, but that he now explicitly wrote down. Basically, the 2 points where he calls the Commission to act, as for our views, these 2 elements are and should be part of the discussion on the basic regulation, as others have said as well, so I will not go into the detail on that one. And that leaves me only to conclude that I think that we are making a big step at this stage to enable timely adoption of the proposal. So once again, congratulations to the rapporteur. Thank you.
Gracias, señor Hatton. Para finalizar.
Thank you, Mr. Hodgson. To wind up.
Thank you, and fairly briefly, in response to Mrs. Fraga, perhaps I shouldn't be surprised that she doesn't like part 2 and 3 of my conclusions, but I just point out that perhaps there is a misunderstanding or a misreading. Part 3 doesn't say that the 12-mile limit should be extended permanently. It just says that the time limit should be extended, and I think that that is a legitimate thing to ask that be considered, because there are all kinds of reasons why in different areas there may be reasons to review things, as we know. But nevertheless, here on this particular article, where since 1983 this regulation has been in place, it's actually the only part of the CFP that is on a fixed 10-year time limit in this way, and yet it's been there since 1983, and we're all saying it's worked well. So why should we be having a debate about a principle, the principle of equal access, which I'd be happy to have a lengthy debate about, because I think that is fundamentally one of the major catastrophic flaws of the common fisheries policy, the fact that that equal access threat or principle exists. When we all seem to be agreeing time after time after time that the 12-mile regime should be maintained, why not just save ourselves this hassle of going through the procedure that we're going through now and accept that that ought to be extended at the very least. But as I said, that is the argument. I think is an opportunity presents itself through CFP reform to actually do something sensible there, and I would certainly be supporting that line. But I hope that members will support this report in its entirety, because it doesn't commit, it simply calls on the Commission, and I think that that's our job, and it's entirely appropriate if we are agreeing that the 12-mile limit should be retained, that we call on the Commission to look at its operation and to consider the issues that I'm raising in 2 and 3, while accepting that on this particular occasion that we accept the need for a continuation in the meantime.
Muchas gracias, señor Hatton.
Thank you, Mr. Hodgson. Could I remind you that the deadline for amendments is the 12th of September. Next point, 9. Fishing opportunities and financial contribution provided for the fisheries partnership agreement between the European Community on the one hand and the Government of Denmark and Home Rule Government of Greenland on the other. We had a presentation of this one from the Commission in July and a brief debate. The Council has told us that the protocol will be signed on the 18th of September. Mrs. Fraga asked for the floor. Did you? No. So the protocol will be signed on the 18th of September. And this morning, Mr. Christensen is going to introduce his draft report. Mr. Christensen, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. The EU-Greenland Partnership on Fishery goes back many years and is equally considered an important cornerstone in the cooperation between EU and Greenland and in the Nordic cooperation of fishery resources in general. The existing sector support programme implemented by the Ministry of Fisheries, Hunting and Agriculture was found to have achieved positive results on measures related to fisheries research, training of staff and fisheries control, thus contributing to improved sustainability of the Greenland fishery sector. The new protocol provides for an EU financial contribution of €17.85 million per year, comprising an annual amount for the access to fishing on €15.1 million and a specific amount of €2.74 million per year for the support and implementation of Greenlandic sectoral fisheries policy. Under the new protocol, the Joint Committee will decide to the fishing opportunities for the subsequent year, taking into account scientific advice, the precautionary approach, the needs of the fishing industry and the minimum quantities for maintaining Greenlandic fishing activities. I consider that the current fisheries partnership agreement with Greenland is coherent, the principle of sustainable fishery, and that it has been of great mutual benefit to both parties. I welcome the fact that during the negotiation process of the protocol, relevant stakeholders were heard, scientific advice was taken seriously, and the new protocol includes simplification on a number of technical issues. I am convinced that the positive effect of the sectoral support measures for the local economy and the coastal communities, particularly in relation to local job creation, will prove over the long term and should therefore be roughly assessed by the Commission at the expiration of the new protocol. I recommend that Parliament should also be given the opportunity for a closer monitoring all along implementing process of the multi-annual sectoral support programme. And furthermore, representatives of the European Parliament acting as observers should be allowed to attend joint committee meetings and proceedings. So in conclusion, I recommend consent to conclusion of the protocol. Thank you very much.
Gracias, señor.
Thank you. Who's next?
Seinen umfassenden Bericht.
Oh, thank you, Chairman. I'd like to thank Mr. Christensen for his comprehensive report. We can agree to it as it stands. The Budget Committee has also given the green light to this report, but I would like to ask for some clarification from the European Commission. If we look at the fishing opportunity for the European Union overall and the fees which are paid for concessions and also for the development of fisheries policy on the basis of European directives, which I hope will happen in Greenland, then I see some differences. We have the 220,000 tonnes of fish caught in Greenlandic waters, caught by Greenlanders themselves every year, of which 48,000 tonnes go to third countries and the European Union. Now, we get 30,000 tonnes of fishing opportunities up until the end of 2012, pelagic and other species. Now, that's under our agreement with Greenland. Now, I don't have an exact overview of this, but exactly how many million euros did we agree in the last protocol? This time it's 17.8 million euros, and we have the right to fish 26,000 tonnes of fish. Previously, the figure was 32,000 tonnes. So I'd like to know what the correlation is there, how these figures fit together. Is it the case that, well, I think it is the case that our payments go directly to Greenland, and then we, in exchange, we get these fishing opportunities on the various Greenlandic fisheries grounds. Now, Greenland manages its own fisheries. The Kingdom of Denmark, a member state, has no oversight over the management of the Greenlandic fisheries anymore, clearly, and that means that we, as the European Union, have to carry out the necessary checks and draw up the necessary reports. That is something I think should happen. Apart from that, I can agree with the protocol as proposed. Thank you. Mrs. Fraga. Thank you. I'd like to thank the rapporteur for what I think is a very balanced report. Now, I'd just like to make a general comment, and then I'm going to put a number of questions to the Commission and to the rapporteur. First of all, in the case of Greenland, this is a multi-species agreement, as is the case with Morocco, Guinea-Bissau, and other countries. And we're now renewing the protocol, and I think it's very important that we have the same principles as in the other multi-species agreements. Looking at this new protocol, it seems that the way that quotas are shared out between the participating countries, the quotas are organised in such a way that quotas can be exchanged between countries which have quotas. Now, in this particular case, it seems that quotas which are not caught by individual countries can be administered by the Commission, and those portions of uncaught quotas can be given to other countries. That I'm a little concerned about. And a more serious point is the financial compensation to be paid by ship owners. In the case of Mauritania, the other negotiations have just been concluded, we have the ship owners paying more than 40% of the amounts concerned, plus the cost of observers and so on and so forth. Now, this is not the case in this particular protocol. The rapporteur has also talked about the evaluation of the previous roads protocol. Now, the thing is, if there is not an increase in the amounts, we have the fishing fees, which have gone up by a factor of 80 to 90, it seems to me. And I'd like to know why this is the case here. Why is this that we have this change, this difference? And I'd like an explanation on this from the European Commission. Because if the Commission says that the ship owners are going to pay more, well, the situation is not clear to me. So it seems to me that there's a difference here between this protocol and other multi-species agreements with other countries. And then, in the case of certain species of crab, I still have problems. The snow crab, in particular. There I put questions to the Commission on this, and for me, the situation still isn't clear. How is it that Greenland still has an arrangement whereby, under certain circumstances, they can close their fishery? And the same problem applies to me, to halibut as well. So, for me, the situation as regards to fishing the snow crab is not clear. There's the 12-mile limit, which Greenland has a right to, but why is the Commission negotiating fishing snow crab when we really don't have an opportunity to fish it because of this 12-mile limit? So I'd like explanations on this, because it seems to me that the negotiations are going on the snow crab, for example, which are going to reach conclusions which can never be implemented. And then another question on the allocation of licenses. It seems that the system being agreed upon is not very effective, because there is the possibility that the European fleets will ask for more quota than they really require, which they will then pay for, but they will not get a refund if they don't use up all the quota. So there's a possibility. There's a problem for me. I think we should negotiate something different. I don't see why fish owners in the or fleets in the European Union should pay for quotas which they can't possibly fully fish and then not get a refund. So I'd like some clarification on those points from the Commission, please. Mrs. Lurvin next.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you so much to the rapporteur. I understand that this agreement is functioning fairly well, and that it's of advantage for Greenland in many respects. But something that worries me a lot is the statement in Mr. Christensen's report that there's some evidence that cod, Greenland halibut, and redfish are subject to unsustainable levels of exploitation. And when I went to ICE's homepage to check the status of these stocks, I'm even more concerned, actually. If we look at the protocol, it contains cod in the NAFO sub-area 1, and as far as I can understand, and the Commission may correct me if I'm wrong, ICES are advising zero catch or similar, and there's also confusion between the coastal cod and the offshore cod, and anyway, the cod has been in trouble in this area for a very long time, and I cannot see that is really in line with the EU having a contributing to sustainable fisheries in other parts of the world. When it comes to the deep pelagic stock of redfish, it lacks a management plan. The target, sorry, now let's see now. It's MSY, and the biomass is unknown. no management plan and no assessment, no references points. So, but very many indications that we're overfishing. So I cannot really see how we can include this species in this protocol and still be sustainable. And when it comes to Greenland halibut, the stock has been below BMSY since the early 1990s and is presently at 55% of BMSY. So if we're going to stick to the principle of only fishing for a surplus of fish, I mean, we cannot say this is a surplus of fish if the stock is not as BMSY. I see that there's been a common management plan that is going to be introduced this year gradually, but the Greenland halibut is very slow growing and can reach a very it's a long-lived species, can be very many years old. So changes in the stock dynamics will take several years, and I don't think that the EU should include this species until the stock is at MSY level and is in a secure level. Further, there's a new introduction of grenadier. So there's 100 ton in the new protocol, which was not in the previous protocol. I cannot exactly understand what species of grenadier this is, because there's a lot of them. Grenadier SPP is not what ICES is referring to in their advice. Perhaps they haven't even made an advice. But as far as I can understand, grenadier are always a deep-sea species, very slow reproducing, slow-growing species, and perhaps the Commission could explain a bit on the grenadier, which species it is, and how come we're introducing this at a time when we are getting more and more understanding of how vulnerable these deep-sea species are. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. I'd like to give the floor to the Commission now. Go ahead.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Firstly, allow me to congratulate the rapporteur for the report and all the work done on that report. I would like to try to answer the questions now concerning the situation of the payments. Basically, you know that the presentation was given by the Commission last time, and I can basically record that the financial package, the current financial package, which for the Greenland, especially for the access, reflects the trends and market prices for the stocks concerned, and basically that was also in the same time we took account in part for the request for Greenland for that increase in the financial contribution. So is it as a package and a result of the negotiations concerning this issue. As for the balanced and the same principle concerning the FPAs, of course, you know that these FPAs, and was mentioned also in the report, is a special nature with the Greenland, and as it is also in the north part of hemisphere, the relations are more complicated here because there is a lot of exchange quotas with other countries, especially Norway, Iceland and Faroe Islands. So basically this exchange comes into the ground when we are looking on the implementation of this agreement, and it's also a very important agreement for the EU for these other countries. Concerning the contribution and license fees, in fact, yes, the Commission always tries to follow the principles, and also, as it is mentioned even in the Council conclusions, that the license fee should be fair in this respect. And we here were looking, comparing the area FPAs and this FPA with the other agreements which we have in the region, namely, as I mentioned, with Norway, Iceland and Faroes, which the result of the license fees which is there is in line with to find the right balance between these agreements, which are not FPAs, and this one FPA which is in the region, given that complexity and relations in the region. As far as the crab situation, yes, indeed, I can note that this was maintained, and the reason for the maintaining of the crab was on the result of the strong political and a strong demand of one member state, notably Spain, and we noted that there was very low internalization last time in the past, but given this very strong interest, today as a negotiation package, this amount, even though it was limited, was kept. And for the technical issues, we had during the implementation of the current protocol, we had several discussions with Greenland on how to resolve the technical issues which are there. But I just want to remind you that this is the agreement between the EU, Greenland, and Denmark, and here basically also we have to respect the laws and regulations in Greenland when fishing this fishery. So this was in line with those obligations. Concerning the situation and about worries about the stocks, and particularly these three mentioned, as far as if you look on the current or the proposed level of the stocks for the new protocol, you mentioned for all these three species which were mentioned endangered, the new protocol goes down. Basically, the quotas reduced substantially, and we always, the Commission always tries to be in line with the sustainability of the stocks. And here, the levels which are there were settled on MSY 15 for these stocks. Now, for cod, for example, more in details, you also might well know that for the joint committee meetings, we always during every joint committee meetings, and this FPA is not the FPA like the others, because here on the joint committee meetings, every year we decide on the level of the quota for the next year, and this is the exercise for the TAC and quota regulations. So basically, the quota which are here are only indicative quota. That's first issue which has to be said. Secondly, on every joint committee meeting in the past few years, always the cod and the specific management plans and the regulation and limitations also in the period and the geographical areas were introduced, which gave the substantial guarantees to the EU for having this species there. That's for that species. Concerning the two others, as far as redfish, pelagic redfish, you might know that there was also the NIAFC management plan recently in last year adopted. So that's basically as it is on that level. We follow being a party, contracting party also to the NIAFC, the recommendations from the NIAFC. Even though it was substantially reduced, it was on the minimum level still kept, which we still think that it's in line with the NIAFC management plan on the redfish. Concerning the Greenland halibut, and that's also in the new protocol. You were correctly mentioned that there is basically on the way the management plan. That was also one of the issues which we asked Greenland to provide, and to, as we are not a coastal state, as we are a coastal state, basically we are in the hands of the Greenland, Norway, and the states which are fishing these stocks. However, we introduced into the new protocol also the footnote, which is basically related to this species, and which clearly sets the catch limitations and fishing effort limitations, and it has to be in line with the multi-annual management plan. So that's basically the guarantees which were given. And I repeat again that these are indicative quota which are set in the every year on the joint committee meeting in November before introducing in the TAC and quota regulation. Thus, there we have, and the Commission and the EU has to look again on the actual scientific advice to either increase or decrease, depending on the scientific advice, the substantial quota, so the respective quota. So that's about this one. Concerning Greenland, concerning the Grenadier, just the short clarification. The Grenadier was already in the previous protocol. However, it was mentioned as a bycatch quota, and if you look on the TAC and quota regulations, it was always there. The only change was that now it was split and put into the separate table, because we took out the bycatch quota for this, and the bycatch quota are in the line with some percentage limitations as in line with the common fisheries policy. And this, for information, these species are mainly used for the exchange with Norway. So that's for this quota. I think that's all from us at this stage. I would like to once again thank you to the reporter for the report and all the work done. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Fraga. If perhaps I didn't express myself clearly enough because you didn't answer one of the questions I was most interested in. This may be something I've misunderstood, but I believe that the European Commission clearly stated that its intention, and it has indicated this with several agreements and the most recent marvellous negotiations with Mauritania, and this, I say this tongue-in-cheek, it has indicated that it wants to see an increase in payments from ship owners. They want a gradual increase in the part paid by ship owners so that there's a decrease in what the Commission pays. I think that's what you're now imposing on everyone. So my question is, and this is based on the latest agreement, the one with Mauritania, which I already mentioned, my question is why, in this case, the rate paid by ship owners is decreasing. It used to be 15%, that was in the assessment report, and the rapporteur already said this. Given the increase in the financial compensation, the level the ship owners are paying has remained the same, which means that it's probably gone from a 15 to about a 10%, I think. So why are you doing this? I want an explanation. I haven't heard one yet. Thank you, Ms. Fraga. This is a question to the Commission. I think it was very clear. Perhaps we could get an equally clear answer.
Okay, thank you for the question. Concerning this, basically, in fact, the ship owner fees were in nominal figures. They were increased slightly. As I mentioned before, we have to look on the context of the agreements which we are working here, because we are in the north part where we have other agreements in place, and this is in line with the agreements which are there, which are not partnership agreements, and as the 40% of the stocks is exchanged with these agreements, this gives basically the role is of the fees. What we have to take into account, it's a new element which was introduced in 2007 for Greenland, and that for the other agreements which the EU has in the region, there is not such obligation. So basically, that what I was trying to explain in my answer previously was that given that there are some agreements where no license fee is introduced, and given that there are some agreements where the license fee is there, this was found as a balance between these agreements in place. Thank you.
Mr. Christensen, go ahead to wind up. Thank you, Chair. And I'd like to thank all the colleagues for their comments, and I'd like to thank the Commission for replying to some of the very technical questions which I would have found it difficult to answer. It's true, as Mr. Kuhn mentioned, the number of species we can catch has decreased, but that's due to, or rather the number of fish we can catch has decreased. That's because there have been overfishing of redfish, cod and halibut. And it's also true that every year we set quotas for the following year in order to make sure that scientific advice is taken into account and to make sure that fisheries are sustainable. Mr. Kuhn also mentioned that fishery controls are no longer in Danish hands. That's not true. It is still a Danish remit, and we've actually moved fisheries controls from Denmark to Greenland because Greenland exports directly to the EU. So that is not true. It's still a Danish remit. So it's still under Danish oversight. Now, of course, there are still a few things that haven't been answered, but I hope we can get those answers along the way, and I look forward to cooperating with everyone on this. Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Mr. Christensen. I would like to remind everyone that deadlines have to be tabled by the 12th of September at noon. 12th of September at noon. Very well, we carry on now. Item 10. Establishing a community system to prevent, deter and eliminate illegal, unreported and unregulated fishing. This was given to the Greens, and we'll now hear a presentation on the proposal by the Commission. Ms. Alaine, you have the floor.
Oui, merci, Monsieur le Président.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. The proposal is aligning the IUU regulation to the Lisbon Treaty. So we're not amending the IUU regulation. In this regulation, the Commission has to report to the Parliament and Council on 2013 on assessing the IUU, and at that point the actual content may be amended. But right now we're only aligning the regulation to the Lisbon Treaty, and in October we'll also be proposing how to align the control regulations. So now I'm not going to give the floor to Ms. Karaman, who is going to outline this, how this alignment is going to take place. Thank you.
Thank you. As said by Mrs. Lene, our proposal just aims to align the IU regulation to the new conditions established by the Treaty for the functioning of the functioning of the European Union, which entered into force on the 1st December 2009. This treaty introduced a new system of implementing acts for the powers of Commission, and they were split now in delegated acts and implementing acts. They are provided in Article 290, paragraph 1 for the delegated acts and 291, paragraph 2 for the implementing powers. The Commission, upon entering into force of the Treaty for Lisbon Treaty, made a commitment to review all the previous acts adopted by the Council, which are now foreseen to be in co-decision. Our changes looked very strictly on the powers which were already in the IUU regulation. And after a thorough analysis, we identified 7 delegated powers and 14 implementing powers. As said above, this is just a strict alignment. It doesn't bring any new changes of substance. And all of these powers have already been granted in the IUU regulation. We would like just to point out a few of these proposals. First of them relates to the establishing the list of non-cooperating third countries. This list was before adopted by the Council after a proposal of the Commission. The proposal of the Commission would remain, but the adoption by the Council was not in line with the new provisions of the Lisbon Treaty. So the Commission proposes to have this power as an implementing power for the Commission, as it relates still is that the nature of this act is still it relates to the execution powers, and in order to respond efficiently to the request regarding IUU fishing, it will be we consider that it's relevant to be for the Commission. A second point that we would like to point out is the emergency measures. They were as such in the IUU regulation, but due to the Lisbon Treaty, we considered it is to be more consistent with the nature of these measures. We now change them to temporary measures, but again, these measures, this change does not affect their substance. It's just an alignment to the nature of the measures, which is limited in time. The last point that we would like to draw the attention is the Article 52. Article 52 provided a general implementing power for the Commission, and this is now not longer in line with the provisions of the Lisbon Treaty. However, Article 52 has been already used by the Commission in providing the regime for the CAS certification scheme of fishery products obtained by small fishing vessels, as well as to adopt the CAS certification scheme to electronic systems or electronic means of other third countries. In order to keep this operational, the Commission then adopted the regulation by adopting a delegated power for the simplified CAS certification scheme. I just want to remind you that this was included in the regulation, the need to have a scheme for the small artisanal vessels, in order to encourage third countries to buy into this system. And then as a second power, it's for the adaptation of the CAT certification scheme to the electronic system of third countries. Here the Commission proposes an implementing power just to reflect what was already achieved by three implementing Commission regulations already adopted. The proposal was adopted on 21st of June, and it was automatically transmitted to the Council and the Parliament. We would like just to remind that this is not a change in substance, just a change in a technical change. And as said by Mrs. Lenné, the substance will follow after the evaluation report will be finalized and presented to you. Thank you, and we hope to have the support of the European Parliament.
Bien, muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. Yes, Ms. Levine.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'd just like to inform the committee that my colleague, Mr. Romeva, will be the rapporteur of this, but unfortunately he couldn't attend today, but we are looking forward to being involved in this, all of us. Thank you.
Bien, muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. Any further requests for the floor? No? Yes? Go ahead, Ms. Fraga.
Bueno, yo...
Yes, I've been skimming through this, and I do have certain doubts about, for example, the adaptation of emergency measures and about implementing powers there. So I have 3 doubts about the implementing measures, but I'll continue to study this and come up with compromises. But I do certainly have some observation, and I don't really agree very much with the Commission proposal, but of course I'll need to look at this in further detail. Thank you. Thank you very much, Ms. Fraga. Let us continue then with our agenda. Item 11, any other business? I don't have any. No, Ms. Fraga, go ahead.
Yo quería decir claramente.
I wanted to state very clearly that I'm extremely disappointed with how we've been receiving documents from the European Commission and how this whole system has been working. I sincerely think that this Parliament is not being given its due respect, and that has been the fact for a very long time. But I don't think we're even working within the framework agreement, where it states that reports or documents that are essential for the work of the MEPs cannot remain confidential. Let me mention a specific case. It's a report I've requested on several occasions. It's on the most recent assessment from 2005. It's a delegation that was sent to Papua New Guinea by DG Mare, and there is also a report from 2011. I am very interested in this. Everyone knows this. I've requested it on several occasions. I get letters. I just received a document which has been thoroughly censored. And some sections are even incomprehensible. And the essential, vital section, which are the comments made by the European Commission, have precisely been blanked out. I think that the Commission is going beyond its powers, and I'm not accusing DG Mare directly. I don't know whose fault it is. I have to talk about the Commission in general. I don't think we can continue working like this, and quite frankly, I think the time has come for us to take measures against the European Commission, because I think that, well, I for one cannot work under these conditions on the issues that I'm interested in, because the European Commission is refusing me information that I need to carry out my work. So ever since the Lisbon Treaty entered into force, the Commission is more restrictive than it was before. It wasn't in the terms of fisheries in the past. So I think we need to act, and I propose a type of blockage towards the Commission until we can reach an understanding, because we don't have any understanding right now, and I am not willing to continue working under these conditions. Thank you.
Vamos a ver, esto lo hemos tratado.
Thank you very much, Ms. Fraga. This is something we discussed specifically at the coordinators' meeting this morning. Ms. Fraga is quite right, and the coordinators agree with her position. We feel that the Commission is exercising an intolerable lack of respect for Parliament and not complying with the framework agreement, and they're not being transparent. We of course need to discuss what types of measures we can take. I mean, I clearly said that, well, you know, we've sent letters, we've called, we've talked to the Commissioner, we've talked to her office, and it's all been useless. So why continue with that? What we discussed this morning was that we need a meeting with the Commissioner ourselves, behind closed doors, because we need to know whether it's, you know, we need to analyze certain points where we as a committee are experiencing great problems with the Commission. We have to discuss these things. So before taking any immediate measures, I propose that we have an urgent meeting so that we can discuss this lack of transparency, lack of data, and the lack of exchange of plans. And that's a very important issue, and it also affects the Council. You will find this information in the coordinators' notes, which I'll send for your approval, and I propose an immediate meeting with the coordinator in order to discuss this in depth, in order to come up with a solution. And if no solution is found, then we're going to have to resort to, well, force, quote unquote. Perhaps the measure proposed by Mr. David or any other measure. It's true that among the coordinators there have been people saying perhaps we don't want to block things because perhaps we might not get achieve the results we want. It's true, I must mention that to you. But today I'm going to talk to the Commissioner's office. I'm going to propose this meeting, and if this meeting is refused, if we don't come up with a solution, then we'll resort to other measures. Do you agree? Yes? That was the information from the coordinators meeting. And yes, Ms. Fraga, go ahead.
Vale.
Well, I had a second request. I would like to hear from DG Trade so that they can explain their policy in fisheries for the future. We've heard that they have authorization to start negotiations with Vietnam for a free trade agreement. Obviously, tuna will be discussed there. Also, Ecuador. There as well, there could be problems with that. There's going to be a lot of problems in the future with ASEAN, Japan relations. These are all issues which are basically going to affect fisheries, not just our industry, but also policies that we're going to have with ACP countries or Papua New Guinea, for instance. If agreements are reached with Vietnam, then that can affect what happens in Papua New Guinea. So I'm emphasizing this. In some areas it might work okay, for example in the automotive industry there might not be problems, but in fisheries it's not the same. So I'd like to ask them to come and give us an overview of what agreements, free trade agreements, are going to have in the future with other countries. I think they should come here and talk to us about it. Because we're the ones, I don't know who there knows a lot about fisheries, in fact. I don't know how much they know about that. But I would like to have someone from the highest level possible. I don't know if I doubt the Commissioner would come. I'm not asking for the Commissioner. However, a Director General or some kind of director should be able to come and tell us about their strategies for fisheries in the future. When it comes to agreements with other countries. Thank you, Mrs. Fraga. Any comments on that? We talked about this yesterday. I agree with you entirely. I've had discussions and exchange of